Ford, 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 Ford.
Hello, old friend.
Westworld Season 2, Episode 6, Phase Space, revealed that the ominous, posthumous puppet master Dr. Ford is still alive. Technically. In a way. Kind of. Not really, but he's alive. And he's possibly immortal. But not organic. He's a Borg. He's transcendent. I'm sorry for that last reference. That movie stinks. Overall, this was a very good episode, possibly my favorite of the season. We got some nice closure to the Shogun World story and Maeve and Akane's journey together. We also saw the reunion between Maeve and her daughter, and how heartbreaking was that. And we also got the reveal at the end of the episode that Dr. Ford has returned. But before we dive into that black hole of Ford's digital immortality, I want to start at the beginning of Episode 6, which is a scene that continues the conversation between Arnold and Dolores from the very first scene of Season 2. In this scene, Arnold is voicing his apprehensions over Dolores' continuing journey towards consciousness. He says that he fears what may become of Dolores and what she might do if she ever becomes conscious. This time, the conversation goes a step further. We see the beginnings of Arnold contemplating his suicide and whether he should allow Dolores to become conscious or just end it all. But what we now know is that this isn't the real conversation had between Dolores and Arnold. It's a recreation of it. This conversation is most likely taking place between Dolores and Bernard, the clone host of Arnold that was created by Dr. Ford sometime after Arnold's suicide. And it isn't just a conversation, it's a baseline test, like the ones had between William and his father-in-law James Delos in the 4th episode of Season 2. In this moment, the baseline test is being conducted by Dr. Ford and Dolores. William said during his baseline test with his father-in-law James Delos that the test should be conducted by someone that the test subject is familiar with. Since Dolores would have access to her conversations with Arnold before he died, Ford could use Dolores as a familiar face for the baseline test. Like William's test with James Delos, Ford and Dolores are testing Bernard for fidelity. They are recreating one of the conversations had between Arnold and Dolores, presumably shortly before Arnold committed suicide. Arnold's consciousness would be uploaded into Bernard, with his last memory being this conversation between him and Dolores. Since Dolores has access to her conversations with Arnold, she will know whether if Bernard is accurate or inaccurate with his responses. In this conversation, Arnold expresses fear over what Dolores could do if she ever truly became conscious, and he contemplates his options. He can either let it play out, have Dolores continue her journey towards consciousness, or he can end it, once and for all, by killing himself, Dolores, and all the other hosts, something that he does attempt to do. Dolores corrects him by saying Arnold never questioned whether or not he had the right to kill himself and Dolores. He only questioned whether he should or should not. Like William and James Delos' tests, Dolores says that she's tested Bernard countless times, and he seems to be continually failing, similar to James Delos. William told his father-in-law that they conducted the same baseline test 149 times, and James Delos failed each time. What this scene implies is that Dr. Ford was well aware of William's secret project to keep James Delos alive, and he had his own project in mind. Through the years, Ford may have secretly perfected William's technology of creating a human control unit by using Arnold's consciousness and Bernard's host body. The control unit that we saw Bernard acquire during these flashbacks may contain the living consciousness of Dr. Robert Ford. Bernard was sent to Delos' secret facility by Ford to retrieve the control unit and then place it inside the cradle. In the final scene of this episode, Bernard places his own control unit inside the cradle, and he is reunited with his old friend and mentor. But let's take a couple steps back. What exactly is the cradle, what is Ford doing inside of it, and how might Bernard and others use it moving forward? Let's start with what the cradle is. The official description for the cradle from Delos is the simulation technology that stores and tests all of our storylines. Delos' time capsule that ensures you get the immersive and dynamic experience you deserve. The cradle was first mentioned by Mailing in Episode 3, when Strand, Stubbs, Bernard, and the rest of the security team were traveling to the Westworld Mesa. The cradle is then mentioned again in Episode 5 by Antoine Costa. Costa tells Strand that the cradle has been hit hard and all of the host data backups have been destroyed. In Episode 6, the cradle is discussed again, this time by Elsie and Bernard. After reaching the Westworld Mesa, Elsie takes a closer look at Westworld's operating system. She notices that every time Delos has been trying to regain control of the system, they were actively blocked every time by the cradle. Bernard says the cradle cannot influence the maze's infrastructure or influence the other systems, but Elsie reveals that the cradle has been interfaced with nearly every discrete system in the entire park over the last 7 days. She says that every time Delos tries to hack into the system, the cradle responds in a totally different way, almost like there's something inside of it improvising its defenses. Bernard wonders if they can access the source code that is generating the responses, but Elsie says she can only see the messages, not the one who was performing the code. Bernard then remembers that the cradle cannot be accessed remotely. It must be accessed in person, but when they travel to the room that contains the cradle, no one is there. Upon entering the room, Elsie is a little freaked out. She says that the cradle reminds her of a hive mind, which is a common science fiction trope. A hive mind is basically a collection of multiple different minds and consciousnesses all linked to one single collective consciousness. I mentioned the Borg in the beginning of the episode because it's probably one of the most well-known collective consciousnesses amongst science fiction nerds. In the case of Westworld's hive mind, the cradle houses the data of all of the hosts that operate in the Westworld park. Like mentioned in the official description, the cradle is used to simulate different host narratives, testing them, perfecting them, making sure that they are up to snuff. But now the cradle is being used to influence and manipulate the Westworld operating system. When they enter the room, Bernard begins to remember that he has been here recently. He says that he brought something here, but quickly corrects himself and says he brought someone here. He then flashes to the scene where he created the red control unit in one of Delos' secret facilities. Flashing back to the cradle, Elsie tells Bernard that Ford also created a defense curtain inside the cradle, which won't allow Elsie to see how the cradle is exactly fighting back against the different hacks. Bernard once again flashes to the scene where he collected the new control unit. Bernard says he can find out how the cradle is fighting back by putting himself inside the cradle. Inside the room, there is a dock that can read host data directly. Against Elsie's objections, Bernard decides to enter the dock. Bernard tells Elsie to pull him out in an hour, and Elsie says she might not be able to put Bernard back together after he's done. The dock removes Bernard's skull, and his personal control unit is extracted from his head and placed into the cradle's massive data collection. Bernard then awakens, now inside a Westworld simulation. He finds himself on the Westworld train, the same train that would transport guests into Sweetwater upon their arrival to the park. It's almost as if Bernard is recreating Teddy's narrative from the very first episode of Season 1. He gets off the train and walks through the town of Sweetwater. He is intently watching the other hosts, who are continuing with their loops with no regard for the actual simulation. He even spots Dolores following her morning routine. He then spots a greyhound running towards the Mariposa Saloon. The greyhound enters the saloon and sits at the feet of his master, Dr. Robert Ford, who was revealed to be the one operating the cradle and fighting off the hacks from Delos. The use of a greyhound is a nice callback to Ford's childhood story in Season 1.
A greyhound is a racing dog. Spends its life running in circles, chasing a bit of felt, made up like a rabbit.
So here he is, Dr. Robert Ford, not in the flesh, but in the cradle. Why did he have Bernard place him inside of it? We know from Elsie Hughes that the cradle has interfaced with nearly every discrete system in the entire park over the last 7 days, the 7 days since Ford was killed by Dolores. In theory, this could mean that Ford, using a combination of the cradle's power and the mesh network that exists between all the hosts, could access and take control of any host in Westworld at will. Me and my Nerd Soup panel speculated on one of our earlier podcast videos that Ford simply uploaded a program designed around his own consciousness and memories into several hosts around the park. So the conversations between William and the younger Ford host, or El Lazo and William, or Lawrence's daughter and William, weren't necessarily conversations between William and the real Dr. Ford, but more like conversations had between William and a version of Ford's ghost or his memory. But now it appears those conversations were truly happening in real time between William and Dr. Ford's consciousness. This could also explain how certain events have transpired throughout Season 2. One that comes to mind is Clementine knocking out Bernard during the Battle of Fort Lauren Hope and dragging him to the cave where he was keeping Elsie Hughes prisoner since Season 1. Clementine seemed to be under Dolores' command, but she breaks off from Dolores' group to bring Bernard to Elsie, something that would be advantageous to Ford. Bernard was reunited with Elsie, who soon forgives Bernard and becomes his ally, and they both discover the Delos experiment. It also sparks Bernard's memory as to why Ford sent him there in the first place, to retrieve this control unit and bring it to the cradle. What we know for sure is that at the end of the episode, Dolores and her band of followers have crashed the Westworld train into the Mesa and are determined to find and retrieve Peter Abernathy. In episode 5, Antoine Costa tells Carl Strand that a third of the hosts that were found dead in the flooded valley contained virgin brains, basically control units that never held data to begin with. On top of that, Costa says that all of the hosts' data backups have been destroyed. From this screenshot, we can see that the cradle has been hit hard, most likely by Dolores and her group. Costa says they put out the fires, but nothing from the cradle can be recovered. This could mean that Ford's time in the cradle may be limited. There are a few specific things that should be noted about Bernard inside the cradle simulation. The aspect ratio changes during scenes that are happening inside the cradle. This could imply that the scenes taking place between Dolores and Bernard are happening inside of a simulation, since they feature the letter boxing. You would think that a control unit would more easily adjust to a simulated world rather than adjusting to actual reality. Another detail is the scar on Bernard's head. While walking towards the Westworld Mesa with Elsie, the scar is still visible on Bernard's head from when he shot himself. But when he enters the cradle's room, the scar disappears. And inside the simulation, Bernard also doesn't have a scar. Could this scene here with Bernard and Elsie inside the cradle's room be happening inside the cradle simulation? Did Bernard enter the cradle inside of the cradle simulation? Should every Westworld video be sponsored by Advil? I think so. To get a better understanding of this theory, I would highly recommend checking out Hack's Dogma's theory video, What is the Cradle? He does a brilliant job of breaking down his theory and analyzing what may be happening with Bernard inside the simulation. It's really good stuff. You should definitely check it out. This episode also sheds some light on Charlotte's personal motivations in Season 2. In this episode, Charlotte is reunited with Ashley Stubbs, and she finally secures Peter Abernathy. Charlotte makes her call to Delos requesting an extraction team. The team is led by the biggest dick in the history of the universe. His name is Coughlin. He struts in the park, acting like he owns the place. He curses out his men, and he even mocks Ashley for having a girl's name. Grow up, Coughlin. He reminds me of my high school basketball coach, and I wonder if his name was in tribute to former New York Giants coach Tom Coughlin, who was known for being a bit of a hard-ass. There are several strange things about Coughlin's demeanor in this episode. First, he seems to be in a rush, and he demands to know where Charlotte Hale is located. Stubbs then tells him that Charlotte is waiting for him in Behavior, and he says that he has the Westworld tech guys working on getting external communications back online. Coughlin then tells Ashley that the Westworld techs need to get their hands out of his system. It would make sense as to why Coughlin seems to be in a rush and is untrusting of the Westworld techs. The entire park has gone to shit, and he's here to clean it up. But then he says something even more peculiar. He refers to his group as the Delta Team. When Coughlin enters the control room, one of the Westworld techs tells him that the problem with the operating system is that there isn't a problem. Coughlin says that is the dumbest thing he's ever heard, and he's been to 3 inaugurations. This line implies that Coughlin has a military background, possibly even serving in a presidential cabinet. The first thing that Coughlin asks of Hale is where she's keeping Abernathy. Hale says that she left Abernathy in the Behavior Lab, and when Coughlin realizes that she left Abernathy alone with Delos' men, he immediately sends one of his soldiers to retrieve him. One of Coughlin's techs is able to get the Westworld map back online, and this is when they realize the Westworld train is heading straight towards the Mesa, igniting an explosion that will allow Dolores and her group to run wild. The one thing that has been bothering me about Season 2 is Delos' lack of action during this 2-week period. If they want Abernathy so bad, why not just send an extraction team in from the very beginning, when you first got word of the massacre? Why are they trusting one person, Charlotte Hale, to do all the dirty work that could be more efficiently handled by a group of soldiers? Maybe Charlotte Hale has her own personal motivations, dating all the way back to Season 1. Maybe she and Teresa were working with a third party. The Delta team led by Coughlin is noticeably absent in the 2-week later time period that features Carl Strand leading his extraction team across the park. If Coughlin is also working for Delos' extraction team, why did he enter the park before Carl Strand, who is presumably his boss? When we take a closer look at Charlotte Hale's device that she used to contact Delos, an unknown administrator tells her that all extraction protocols have been initiated, and the extraction teams have been dispatched. Focusing on the word teams, there's a chance that Strand's Alpha team hasn't landed yet, and that Coughlin was the first to arrive with his Delta team. Or maybe Hale hasn't been in communication with Delos at all. Coughlin may be leading a third party that is trying to steal Delos' IP. That could explain why they're in such a rush and why Coughlin doesn't want any of Westworld's techs to get in his way. It could also explain why Coughlin becomes anxious when Hale says that she has left Abernathy unattended with Delos' quality assurance team. In the preview for the next episode, we can see a massacre occurring inside the Westworld control room. Now, this could either be the massacre we see Maeve and Sizemore stumble upon in the first episode of Season 2, or this could be a massacre that involves Coughlin's team. In this shot, we see Bernard overlooking the massacre, which could be Ford's attempt to wipe out Coughlin's team and foil Hale's plan of smuggling Westworld IP to a third party. We can also see Bernard shooting a machine gun, which is interesting because Bernard is sporting the same murder psycho eyes he wears when he's under Ford's control, but he's also wearing the same outfit that he wore when he first entered the cradle. As for the other storylines in this episode, Maeve and Akane's time together is given proper closure. It begins in the aftermath of the Shogun World battle, with headless bodies sprawled across the floor. Maeve notices Akane removing Sakura's heart, and Maeve assists her doppelbot by ripping off her sleeve and lending it to Akane. Akane plans to take Sakura's heart and bury it in Snow Lake, the place where Sakura was born. But before they can make that trip, they first must save Hector, Musashi, Armistice, and Hanario. Instead of using her telepathy to control the Shogun's men, she allows Musashi to duel Tanaka to the death, which ends up being one of the greatest samurai fights in the history of the known world. Excellently choreographed, in the daylight, not at nighttime. Imagine that. We can actually see what's going on, and it ends with Musashi winning the duel. There is a subtle reference at the end of the duel to the Japanese ritual harakiri. It's when a samurai would voluntarily commit suicide by stabbing himself in the stomach. Once he begins to carve his stomach, his opponent would show him mercy by giving him a clean death. Maeve says that she didn't interfere in Musashi's duel because every host has the right to make their own decisions and take their own paths, even if that path leads to death. The group then travels to Snow Lake, which is stunning. Akane then lights a fire and burns Sakura's heart, a ritual that serves as a funeral for her young friend and daughter. Instead of continuing on Maeve's journey, Akane and Musashi decide to stay in Snow Lake, saying that this is their home, and if they can't protect it, how can they expect to build a new one? Maeve allows Akane and Musashi to make this decision, a decision that will most likely lead to their demise, but their decision nonetheless. Hanario, on the other hand, straight up pieces both of them. She was like, oh, you guys are staying here? Cool, have fun with that. The rest of the group then escape back into Westworld through the hidden tunnels that Sizemore had mentioned in the previous episode. Upon arriving back in Westworld, Maeve is finally reunited with her daughter. Maeve and her daughter share a touching moment where they discuss protection, survival, and the importance of family. But Maeve's daughter has been assigned a new mother, someone that I have dubbed Diet Maeve, or Maeve Zero. It appears that Maeve's daughter and Diet Maeve are still living in their narrative, so Maeve believes that Ghost Nation has come to kill them. She grabs her daughter's hand and begins to run away, leaving Diet Maeve left for dead. But what happens next is surprising to say the least. Instead of attacking Maeve and her daughter, one of the members of Ghost Nation tells Maeve that they are destined for the same path. Sizemore takes advantage of the chaos by using the quality assurance radio he found in the previous episode to call for help. Felix is upset by his decision, but can you really blame Sizemore? He is a human, not a host, and his story ends when he dies. He realizes that his role in Maeve's story won't end well for him. Felix decides to follow Maeve and the other hosts, while Sizemore and Sylvester wait for help. Now, going to the William and Emily plotline, the two characters had a much-needed reconciliation. Lawrence initially believes that Emily should not be traveling with them, but William says that she can handle herself. When they first begin to talk, William believes that Emily is a host created by Ford. His paranoia is now getting the best of him. Emily proves how capable she is when she spots a honeypot trap and then quickly disposes of the attackers who set the trap. Later that night, Emily attempts to talk with her father again. She tells her father that she was invited to the gala by Charlotte Hale, but chose to spend her time in the Raj instead. Luckily for her, she even provokes her father by telling him she spent some time in the pleasure houses, something that we know is not true since Emily refused to sleep with anyone who was a host. Emily says that the Raj was always her favorite park when she would visit as a kid, and William is surprised. He thought that Emily was scared of the elephants when she was younger, but Emily corrects him, saying that it was her mother who was scared of the elephants. According to Emily, her mother was the only one who truly realized the dangers of the park. The elephant story was probably a clever way for William to test his daughter's memory to see if she was human or host, and it's a test that she passes. Emily then surprises William when she tells him that she no longer blames him for the death of her mother. It's a rare moment where the man in black shows his humanity. You can see tears brewing in his eyes. For a moment, it seems that their strained relationship could be mended. William agrees to leave Westworld with his daughter, saying that they have the same goal of burning the park to the ground, and once that's accomplished, they will leave together. But when Emily awakens the next morning, she finds that her father and his men have abandoned her. Even after his daughter showed him forgiveness, William still cannot let go of his addiction to the park. I'm also not totally convinced that Emily's main objective is to escape the park with her father. If we go by her notebook and demeanor in episode 3, Emily entered the Raj with a goal of finding something hidden within one of the parks, and we speculated that it was Delos' secret project, due to the symbol that appears in her notepad. Maybe her objectives have changed given the dire circumstances. I don't think she expected to walk into the host revolution when she visited the Raj, but I doubt it. Emily is a very interesting character, and while I do think she is trying to save her father and she does forgive him, there's something more going on here. William and his men are then ambushed by Ghost Nation. Ghost Nation still remain the biggest wildcard in this show. In one episode, they are shown to be killing hosts and saving humans, but now they want to team up with Maeve and are seen attacking William and his men. People speculated that Ford may be controlling Ghost Nation through the cradle, and they are carrying out Ford's bidding throughout the park. Going to Dolores and Teddy subplot, Dolores seems to be regretting her decision to turn Teddy into a Terminator. While trying to get information out of a Westworld security officer concerning the whereabouts of Peter Abernathy, Teddy shoots the man in the head before he can finish, saying that they will find Peter regardless. Dolores is visibly terrified while Angela is kind of turned on. Every time Dolores tries to bring up something from Teddy's past, Teddy is dismissive of the notion. He says that the old Teddy was weak and born to fail, and that Dolores fixed him. During a conversation on the Westworld train, Dolores says her father always told her to run away from this place. She asks Teddy if he thinks that's the right thing to do, and Teddy answers that he never thought he would leave this place, but that Dolores fixed that too. While it was awesome to see James Marsden finally play the Black Hat, Teddy seems to be conflicted by the changes Dolores made to him. Maybe the old Teddy is still there, trying to creep in and take control, and it will be interesting to see how this plays out moving forward. Dolores and Teddy then send the Westworld train loaded with explosives barreling towards the Mesa entry terminal. Teddy gives the Westworld technician that has been accompanying them an unloaded revolver and a single bullet. Teddy tells the man it's the last of his mercy, and he leaves him to take his own life. So what we are going to see on Sunday night's episode is a convergence of these different plot lines. First, we have the Dolores and Teddy plotline, we have the Hale and Coughlin plotline, and we also have the Elsie and Bernard plotline that features Bernard and Ford inside the Cradle's simulator. And now all these characters are in the same place, the Westworld Mesa. So it promises to be another chaotic episode of Westworld that is probably going to leave us with more questions than answers. But what did you guys think about this episode? Leave your thoughts in the comment section below. Make sure to dislike this video, unsubscribe to the channel, and don't share it with anyone. Okay, this is between me and you.